Hi everyone. So it's 2 minutes after this start of the call in theory, and there's a bunch of people here, including Mike, who's got the only agenda item. So let's get started. Welcome to the Tuesday, September 9th SIG Multicluster call. And I didn't see anything specific to scrub, but maybe we can go over that afterwards if there's still time. Mike, you've got a topic on the placement decision kit.
Yes.
I imagine to discuss, to explain the changes you made recently following the discussions we had in previous weeks. So I'll let you take over. You can share your screen if you want to present.
Yep, let me share my screen. So we had a really great discussion. Just to get everyone up to speed, we had a great discussion last week on the placement decision cap and what the how to move this cap and how to move this cap forward. Essentially, there are a few issues with the cap in the last iteration because there was kind of like an implied hint and even a placement reference to a standardized placement object when the goal of the cap itself is to have the placement decision without having the placement API spec defined. Because to define a common scheduling spec might be quite difficult. We're hoping to have the outcome of a scheduling decision um, out there for consumers to use for multi-cluster purposes prior to having a common placement scheduling spec. So based on that discussion, I've made several changes and as well polish up the overall cap. And I'm sorry that I made those changes quite late. And please take your time to consume the changes that I made. But in general, we talked about how we're gonna remove the placement reference completely, and then we talk about how we should have a more explanation on how the consumer will discover and to use the placement decision. And that's the main thing that I highlighted in this new section, consumer discovery and usage, mainly highlighting the fact that we want to, for the consumers, they'll need to either use the label to gather all the decisions, or they use the actual name of the placement decision itself to get the target cluster results. And then, so that was kind of like my first crack at it. But then I went over this morning again prior to this meeting. I noticed that the label was still heavily implying there's kind of like a placement object somewhere. So I kind of made a last minute change. So feel free to provide more feedback on this change from like the placement, the label that all the decisions should have for the consumers to look up. To I change it from a placement to a decision key, which is kind of the same as the current decision index. So it's follow a similar pattern. So the index is for if you have over 100, it becomes kind of like slices, kind of like the endpoint slice. And then the key is all the decisions should have, so that if you have multiple of these decisions, the consumer can look up on the key and get the target clusters. And I also, in overall the entire cap, I trying to clear out the placement reference, or when I explain the placement, I mentioned that the placement is it's a concept and not a actual, maybe I should put a concept in there, and not a actual resource, yeah, not standardizing in the cap and not exist as a resource. And then I added the new scheduling decision which reflect more of the reality of this CAP, which is the outcome of the scheduling. So those are the changes that I made. I'm happy to discuss here, and I'm also happy to wait for reviewers to go over the changes and then see additional feedback. So those all I have for today. Feel anyone have any questions, comments?
I'm still a little bit confused about how, like, what are we hoping to gain from formalizing the placement decision without also formalizing the requests that the decision represents? And maybe to clarify, like, let's look at this diagram right here that's on screen. Like the placement controller writes a decision, but what is the decision? Like, what does it reflect? What work is being placed? And then without that, don't the various consumers that read the placement decision have to already be integrated into the non-standardized APIs of the scheduler to know what that decision actually means?
So the decision only contains the output, essentially where the workload should be placed in. So in the decision itself, it has a list of cluster profiles, and that's basically it. So for consumers, they are looking to place some workload to somewhere, and then maybe they're watching this somewhere and reacting based on this decision, and they do not have the scheduler themselves, or they do not, in this case, need to know what the scheduler is, because all they care about is, I have a certain workload, whether it's app or whatever, GitOps, and then they just need to know, where do I place these workload to. So
Right,
in that
right.
case, yep.
But the format of the workload is not yet standardized, right? And so there needs to be some mutual knowledge of this proprietary workload format between the scheduler and the consumer, right?
There needs to be some format.
Like we haven't standardized the workload format.
Yep.
So like normally when we go to standardize things, which I think having like a standard way to represent placement makes sense. The goal is so that the consumer and the producer don't need to know anything about each other, right? Like you can have any arbitrary scheduler, you can have any arbitrary consumer, and as long as they use the common placement API, you can swap one for the other, and it still works the same way. But without a standardized workload or placement request format, it seems like the consumer and the producer still need to know about each other, because they still need to know which proprietary API to speak. There's a lot of hands right now, so let other people talk. I think Ryan, you were up first.
Yeah, Ryan, you're first.
Yeah, I think that's actually is the key. Jeremy's question. From what I see, it's not necessarily true. Or what? Let me try to be clear. What you described is exactly what we're trying to do. Is that the consumer and the producer don't have to know each other. At least the purpose of this API is, for example, we want the Argo CD and more recently multi-queue. be able to integrate with, say, KubeFleet, or Kamada OCM, and whatever KubeSphere, whatever, without knowing any of these projects' specific implementation, the scheduling API. That definitely is the goal for this API. I think we are on the same page there. Correct me if I'm wrong. And from what I can see, okay, maybe I can either share something, or I can send the link there. So there are examples like the Argo CD, and I don't know if I can share. So there is, I have some two examples. There's Argo CD. It's called Cluster Decision Resource Generator, and the other is the multi-queue custom implementations. These are two examples that these projects, they basically left out APIs defined just for integration with this type of APIs, the scheduling decision APIs. So these multi-cluster projects, they outsourced the scheduling part to the outside. Yeah, and if we have a scheduling decision API, common decision API, and we can implement that, then we could, yeah, so it can be interchangeable. Every other project, multi-class project that output this API will be able to integrate with multi-queue or Argo CD without any extra work. That, as far as I know, that seems to be possible with this API, and they don't need to know the workload. If you look at those APIs, they don't have the workload side in those defined at all. They are just outsourcing the cluster names, basically. In a very high level, they are only outsourcing the cluster decision. Yeah, that's basically the examples I can find. And probably there's some more, but these two are really kind of prominent multi-cluster project that don't do scheduling. And they are basically super popular de facto standards in some sense. Yeah, that's it.
Laura, do you want to go next?
Yeah.
I don't know who else.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I want to kind of go back to the decision key API example. I can share my screen too. No, I can't. But yeah, okay, yeah, this kind of thing. Just to make sure that I understand. So like this decision key Argo CD /app, this is like some sort of like reference to like a label that Argo CD uses to, like, I guess maybe to tie this to the prior conversation too, I feel like this decision key is something that's linking the request that so not shown on the diagram is like the step where somebody asks the scheduler, where should I put this thing? Which I think is the part that you're trying to avoid, but also the part Jeremy is like, where's that? Or like, how does that handoff occur? And I am trying to understand if this decision key is the thing that right now is helping to refer to like what was in general the thing that got piped in to the scheduler. So that's like the catch on the other side for the actual like thing that's doing the placement to like link what the scheduler decided with the thing that it decided on. So I think on the one hand, I don't totally understand the decision key. So maybe if you could explain again, that would be cool. And then two, I want to link that to this larger conversation about like how this like basically opaque value can be leveraged by the scheduler or not, and like what kind of state the requesting cluster needs to, or whatever the hub cluster, I guess, needs to hold on to know that this placement decision is about this decision key. And yeah, I think that's my question right now.
Yes, so maybe I didn't have the best description here, and I'm gonna go back and see how I can improve on the decision key. So on the decision key here in this recommended format, I think I have it as the namespace and then /app, and that's kind of saying that we're what you kind of described, right? It's like who is asking the question of where to put this workload to. And in this particular example is coming from the Argo CD and then /app, this particular app name. And in this particular app is asking, oh, where should I put my workload to? And then the decision and this placement decision represent the answer to that question. And then having the key helps you group all the slices. I think we all understood that. And then on the scheduler side, it's, I guess the scheduler is the one that's creating the placement decision, and this scheduler is also writing this particular key, the Argo CD /app. And then the consumer is using this key to link back to the scheduler or the original intent, without having to know like which custom scheduler it came from. So that's kind of the linkage there.
Okay, and then so are you expecting that a scheduler is going to make any of its decisions based on properties of what is actually like in either Argo CD /app in this case, or whatever is derivative of Argo CD /app, like whatever linked objects there are to that, or is it not based on anything, no properties of the workload itself?
No properties of the workload itself. I think it's I think it depends. So currently what, based on this kept assumption, is it doesn't know about the workload. We're providing kind of like the list of maybe the list of cluster with the most available resources. So in that case, maybe the workload doesn't need to know what the workload itself. It's just ranking the cluster based on available GPUs, CPUs, whatever. In this case, it's GPU.
Okay, so in that sense, like the request may be from the consumer could have been like not where should I put this, but it could have been like where should I put anything right now? And the scheduler could be like, hey, this is the list of best places right now. And then the consumer could, like, having not needed to, like, I mean, I guess it will still need to know state of what it possibly asked about, or just know about what it's trying to schedule next, could then be like, okay, I'll put something there. Is that feels like something that is like the most decoupled between like the scheduler needing to know anything about what the placement request is. And if that's like the intention, then I think that's one thing. I think we can then debate on whether that is like useful compared to any other option. And but yeah, I think right now I see how, like, I respect that there's like other examples that are doing like producing a API response that just says a bunch of placement decisions. And I recognize that this is kind of like, you know, taking some inspiration from that as well. So I think personally, I'm going to go take a look at some of those so that I can understand where it's coming from a little bit better. But yeah, on the point of trying to like totally decouple what was once placement ref, like obviously this decision key is still functioning somewhat similarly. It's just like, it's a little bit more, it's less, how to say, like, it's implying something less well-defined, but I think it's still potentially, depending how you expect the schedulers to use this information, implying something that the scheduler needs to know what the type of, how to parse what the decision key or its derivatives are like in order to do any of its process. And so I think that is something to decide if that is the intention of this KEP, I guess, if the goal is really to decouple those two things. So sorry, that was like a little fragmented because I'm still kind of like absorbing some of these things, but the changes, but that is kind of what I'm thinking right now. And thank you for re-explaining decision key for me too. I'll cede the floor for the next person.
Thank you, Lord. What you make sense. Who's the next person? Can someone? Yeah.
I'll go next. Because I think Owen's also in the queue. As far as I remember from the last time, we also did a little bit of a small dive into this decoupling specifically, because right now, if we take Argo CD as an example, it would both make the decision based on something that is locally defined, so that would not be transferable to any other controller or API. It would be purely something that Argo does. And then afterwards, it creates resources that are then scheduled as though there were normal resources. And while the work API and the decision, the placement decisions would essentially go hand in hand if we take Argo completely out of the picture and just imagine a workload that is defined and then a placement decision that is used to place that workload. In both cases, I think the scheduler shouldn't necessarily be aware of any of that at that point. So this decouples the work and the placement from the scheduler. Unless, of course, we would want the scheduler to be multi-cluster aware so that every spoke or managed cluster would have to be placement aware to know which workloads to essentially schedule locally. But the problem which you again get is that not every cluster would know if any other cluster has also picked up the same decision and the same work. So you would need something different, something that's not the scheduler, to help with generating the work that is to be placed. I can imagine that if you have something like Argo and you were to say, use that to deploy multi-queue and use that to then perform work, you get several levels deep into multiple scheduling engines, multiple rule engines, essentially, that all have to, well, interoperate without having to necessarily know about each other. And I think that's where the decoupling, the pretty wide decoupling, where you can ask for a placement without having to enforce that on the scheduler. That's where that comes in, from my perspective. Because if you wouldn't do that, then that means that every little bit of cluster profile and placement information would immediately influence any scheduling, which is not always what you want.
Just to clarify, so do you think this achieve this decoupling or not?
Yes, as far as decoupling, this does make that happen. But as far as the implementation, specifically if there should be some certain label or something, completely new resource or some other definition to be created, I'm not entirely sure about that yet. I'm also still processing. But decoupling wise, this makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider right now, most of the things that do multi-clustery things all do this internally as one big blob, essentially. And this would bring that out into the open. So same with the Gateway API, where you also take internals that would normally be internal to some implementation. We make a spec out of it, and then you essentially make it so that the components suddenly become more interoperable. And the placement decision in that story would essentially, if we take Argo, and I can't really speak to Flux because I haven't used Flux in months, the same thing would apply there, where you need some placement, some decision information, but that should not necessarily be unique to some GitOps reconciliation controller that you happen to be using, it should also exist without it, or across multiple controllers that maybe work together. Maybe you want the decision engine from Flux to generate a list in Argo. I don't know why you would do that, but that is something that then would become possible. I don't know if that helps, but yeah, that's as far as I've gotten.
It's your
It's-
turn, Ryan.
Just to add on what this discussion is, and I don't know if Jeremy is still here, is we definitely would still like to get to the scheduler part too. This API definitely doesn't mean we don't want to get the scheduler part. So if there is momentum or there is motivation to get to the scheduler API too, we definitely would like to work on that too. Just to add that this is not the end goal, but this is the incremental step. I feel like it definitely brings value, but we all agree that if we can get to a scheduler API, that'd be great. But it's it may take a while.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, that makes sense. I can definitely see that that's the end goal from the KEP. I think I've been trying to wrap my head around the value of the intermediate step is the main thing. Like, should we just hold off until there's a KEP that covers the whole spectrum? And I think, you know, we've talked about a few use cases here. I think what the KEP is missing for me now is like an example flow maybe to highlight this, like in the KEP.
Okay.
Flow would definitely help because looking at the oh, sorry, Owen, I see your hand is up. Yeah, looking at it, I also see that the small diagram does help you with placing it somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily help you with the entire flow. So yeah, that probably be an awesome addition.
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of us are also questioning like what in the diagram it starts with scheduler placement controller without an arrow into it, I think by some design and purpose, but I think we're
Yes.
still really twisted about that right now. So I think at least some of the assumptions that the authors think that thing is like would help us understand it, and then I think we can more easily articulate if this is a sufficient decoupling or if like that still gives value or whatever. Like I think that top end, which I know you're trying to avoid, but I think like we need at least to know what the shadow of that thing is.
Got it. Okay.
Especially since this is essentially a scheduler for clusters. So we're actually making a scheduler for a scheduler. So yeah, the problem is that the word scheduler is already in use, so we can't really call it a scheduler. But yeah, arrow into the box. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Oh, and your
I
hand
think-
is back.
Yeah, I think I was next. I was just I thought of like an example from some stuff that we worked on that seems like this wouldn't really be able to capture very well, which is when we were building a system that kind of worked like this, we had a mechanism where basically when you wanted to remove one of the clusters that was currently, in the placement decision, there was a mechanism to kind of like gradually drain, gradually scale down the workload on that cluster before then eventually removing it entirely. So we had, kind of a status or a state field in there where we could have like, the state is currently like draining, and then there was some machinery to kind of track, how far along we were in that, and then that would like feed back in to the scheduler. So I wonder if we need something like that, like just ways to kind of express a little bit more more state beyond just like Boolean, like this is scheduled or this is not scheduled. which again starts to get more and more coupled to the the scheduler and the consumer, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was discussed during the draft of this cap as well. I think where you're kind of alluding, I think at least to a consumer feedback, and we mentioned consumer feedback. It's not in scope for this cap because like the tightly coupled reasoning as you mentioned, and then you really need the placement.
Actually, in my view is this is the consumer's side, what Owen described. One thing is definitely it's real world examples, but for my perspective, this decision is kind of like a spec for the other guys. Like this is my decision that, for example, the second fleet class 2 is no longer selected. But how do you actually remove things that is already placed there or other stuff? That depends on, that's totally up to the consumer. So that's why the status will not be here. That's where the decouple comes. So this is just says the decision. Now we don't want to, we will say class 2 is going to decommission or get upgraded. We want to drain it. Then it's a drainer's job to do the actual draining, and all the status will be there. It kind of applies to anything, drainer or Argo CD or multi-queue. The whole action is on the consumer side. This is just pure decision so that they can be kind of decoupled. Otherwise, we kind of become single one giant system.
I guess in our case, the reason that we put it here is that the scheduler would kind of preferentially reactivate draining clusters if it needed to, rather than picking a completely new cluster. So that's why it needed some knowledge of what the drainer was doing, or it needed to maybe even be able to control what the drainer was doing, or I don't know.
Yeah, then this case is then if the scheduler and the consumer need multiple interaction, then yeah, then this API probably cannot work in this case.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I don't see any hands up. And I understand what I need to do to continue to enhance the cap. So I just want to say thank you all for the discussions. I'm gonna stop my sharing right now.
And thank you for working on this.
Yeah. Thanks for the updates.
Okay, I don't even know where to do. Okay, there it is. Thank you. Oh, John. So I did add the use cases that you mentioned into the cap as well. We had the discussion last time. You mentioned there's several other scenarios where this cap might be used. So I did add one or two use cases at the end. So please feel free to take a look if it capture essentially what you were saying. Thank you.
Yeah, I did have a quick look at it, and it does indeed already list the one that I put in the chat there as well. There was another one that the multi-queue thing triggered. I think it was in KubeCon EU London, where there was someone explaining a very similar use case to this, but they weren't using Argo, and they would actually need multi-queue to support this in order to do multi-cluster multi-queue. Well, multi-queue is of course multi-cluster, but whatever. But to not have to redevelop the same engine that was already developed in Argo CD and was already developed in Flux. So yeah, it makes total sense that those use cases will be included. But still, I do, with Laura and with everyone else mentioning that it's not necessarily clear where the arrow goes into the box, where what happened before this stuff Yeah, I also think that it is risky because you end up designing an entire system. On the other hand, maybe that's what it takes.
Okay. I think we'll keep delivering on it, and hopefully we'll get to a point where we are, happy with the kit, and we'll just continue hacking on it. Thank you all again.
All right, thank you, Mike. And thanks, Laura, for adding notes to the agenda docs. Yeah, so I said we'd go over the scrub after the discussion on placement to Zoom, but I don't really have anything particular that showed up on the scrub when I went over it today. So unless anybody has anything they want to bring up, perhaps we can finish early.
I just wanted to meta bring up on scrub stuff. There's been some improvements. Thank you, Stephen, on the filter list. So if in the sort of backlog section of the agenda, there's this long list of issue and pull requests, but the top link is a filter across with our label, and before not all of the repos under our SIG multicluster subprojects were represented there, but I think it's a lot better now. Stephen, you can answer if you feel that it's complete or not. But anyway, so this is now a better list for us to be working from when we're trying to pull some stuff up to scrub. So I think that will improve visibility just generally for people who are trying to take a look at stuff, either for the scrub or for themselves, and then for the leads too, to be able to keep track of some of these things more cleanly. So just wanted to surface that if you're looking for stuff in a scrub for scrub purposes, this list is now easier to use. That's it.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura, for adding the SIG multicluster label all over the place. So on that topic, actually, what Laura and I had planned was to add actions to the various repos we have to automatically add the SIG multicluster label. And Rainbow Mango brought up the idea of maybe using a GitHub project board instead. So I've been looking into that a little bit. Some other SIGs use those, but one of the things that I'm running into is that I don't think it can work across organizations, and we have issues and PRs across that we care about in both Kubernetes for all the caps and in Kubernetes SIGs for all of our repos. So I'm not sure that would work, or we'd have to have two boards. But yeah, that's something I'm looking at. And if anybody has any particular experience with, so I've used project boards on GitHub before, but if anybody has particular experience using them in the context of SIGs, feel free to chime in on. I'll paste the link in the chat. That's a PR on MCS API. I'll add it to the agenda notes as well.
Yeah, something kind of useful. I know in the for DRA from Working Group Device Management, I'm using a board that is able to pull in stuff that's cross repo, cross org, but it's not super smart about it. Or I don't know, it's a little bit of different interface to get the stuff in that's cross org compared to the stuff that's in org. At least from my experience just as a user, and then I have no idea what the back end looks like for that thing. But there is some example of something that does something like that. And then I think if it really was just the difference between KEPs and all of our actual sub-projects, maybe 2 project boards is okay.
Yeah.
Can confirm that is probably a better option because we did a commercial project with a couple of different companies and they have different boards. The only way to actually make it work is to write a bot that synchronizes it and uses webhooks and events and all the other stuff. Might be a little bit too much upkeep for what we're intending to do here. 2 boards is probably going to be the best option.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I'll look at setting that up then. Okay, well, if there's nothing else to discuss, I'll wish you all a pleasant week and look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. I'm just checking if there's an APAC call on Thursday. And there is, so for those of you who participate in the APAC call, see you on Thursday. Thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for the interesting discussions as
everyone.
always.
Thank you.
Bye.